My parents treated me like a servant on Thanksgiving, feeding my masterpiece to the dog while dismissing me from my own childhood home. I left broken, but when their golden child needed a savior for his wedding, I returned, not as a daughter, but as the ruthless businesswoman they never saw coming. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The air inside my car was stale, recycled heat battling the biting November frost pressing against the windows, but I was shivering for a reason that had nothing to do with the temperature. On the passenger seat beside me sat a box I had constructed with the precision of an architect. Inside was a salted caramel apple pie, a lattice-crusted labor of love that had taken me 6 hours to perfect. The apples were heirloom, sourced from a specific orchard 2 hours upstate. The caramel was spun by hand until it reached a deep, dangerous amber. I wasn't just a baker. I was Florence, the owner of Savor, the city's most exclusive catering firm. I managed million-dollar accounts, directed staffs of 50, and had been featured in magazines my mother kept on her coffee table but never opened. Yet, as I pulled into the long, gravel driveway of the estate where I grew up, I felt my chest tighten, reverting instantly to the frightened little girl who just wanted to be told she was good enough. I wasn't feeling well. My body was aching, a dull throb in my joints that I had attributed to the 70-hour work weeks leading up to the holiday season. I was physically depleted, my throat scratchy, my eyes burning with exhaustion. I had almost canceled. I should have canceled. But the text from my mother, Martha, had been brief. "Dinner is at 4, don't be late, and bring something sweet since that's what you do." That backhanded acknowledgement, "since that's what you do," was the closest thing to an invitation I'd received in 3 years. I killed the engine. The house, a sprawling Georgian colonial that screamed old money and cold hearts, loomed over me. I took a deep breath, grabbed the pie box, and stepped out. I walked up the stone steps, my heels clicking a rhythm that sounded too loud in the oppressive silence of the neighborhood. I didn't have a key. I hadn't had a key since I was 22 and changed my major from pre-law to culinary arts. I rang the bell, I waited. The wind bit at my exposed cheeks, making my eyes water. Finally, the heavy oak door swung open. It wasn't a servant, and it wasn't my brother, Caleb. It was Archie, my father. He was wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my first car, holding a tumbler of scotch. He didn't step back to let me in. He didn't smile. He didn't even look at my face. His eyes dropped immediately to the box in my hands, then swept over my coat, looking for dirt, for flaws, for anything to criticize. "Hello, Dad," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "Happy Thanksgiving." Archie took a sip of his drink, his eyes flat. He blocked the doorway with his body, a physical wall between me and the warmth of the foyer. I could smell roasting turkey and sage stuffing, scents that should have been welcoming, but instead felt like a taunt. "You're late," he lied. It was 3:55 p.m. "I'm early," I corrected gently, lifting the box slightly. "I made the pie, the one you used to like, salted caramel." He sighed, a long, weary sound as if my very presence was a tax on his existence. He looked me over one last time, his gaze lingering on my boots, which were scuffed from the gravel. "We have guests, Florence," he said, his voice devoid of any paternal warmth. "Important people, Caleb's potential investors. We can't have distractions." My stomach dropped. "I'm your daughter, I'm not a distraction." "You're a cook," he sneered, the word dripping with disdain. "And you look like you've been sweating over a stove all day. It doesn't fit the aesthetic we're presenting tonight." I stood there stunned, the heavy box trembling in my hands. "So, what? I can't come in." Archie checked his watch, bored. "Drop it off and leave quietly. We'll tell everyone you were busy working. It's believable enough." The betrayal hit me harder than the cold. I had driven an hour, sick and exhausted, seeking a scrap of family connection, only to be told I was a prop that didn't make the cut. The cruelty was so casual, so routine for him, that it took the breath right out of my lungs. "Drop it off," I whispered. "Dad, I'm sick. I just wanted to have dinner with you." "Don't make a scene, Florence," he snapped, reaching out not to hug me but to grab the box. "Go home, clean yourself up. Try again Christmas, maybe, if you found a better job by then." The door didn't close yet, but the emotional slam was deafening. It wasn't just a rejection, it was an erasure. My hands were empty. Archie had snatched the box with a greedy efficiency that belied his dismissal of its contents. I stood frozen on the doormat, the wind whipping my hair across my face, unable to process the absolute humiliation of the moment. Then I saw her. Martha appeared behind Archie, a vision in beige silk and pearls, holding a glass of white wine. She looked at Archie, then at me, and finally at the pie box in Archie's hand. For a second, a singular, foolish second, I thought she would intervene. I thought the maternal instinct would override the socialite programming. I thought she would say, "Archie, don't be ridiculous, let her in, she's shivering." "Is that the dessert?" Martha asked, her voice light and airy, completely ignoring the fact that I was standing outside like a solicitor. "She brought pie," Archie grunted, turning back toward the interior. "I told her we're set." "Oh, Florence," Martha sighed, stepping into the doorway just enough to look down at me. She didn't look angry, she looked pitying, which was infinitely worse. "You know we ordered the tart from Piers. It's just more refined." "I made it from scratch, Mom," I said, the fight draining out of me. My joints ached so badly I wanted to sit down right there on the stone. "It's the best thing on my menu." Martha took the box from Archie. She opened the lid, glancing at the perfect latticework, the glistening sugar crystals. "It does look rustic," she commented. She turned, walking away from the door, leaving it open just a crack so I could see into the hallway. I watched, paralyzed, as she walked over to where our purebred Weimaraner, Duke, had his feeding station set up in the corner of the mudroom. She bent down, her knees cracking slightly, the only sign of her age, and set the pie, my masterpiece, on the floor directly next to the dog's water bowl. "At least he appreciates the effort," she called out, her voice echoing off the marble floors. "Duke loves apples. It won't go to waste, Florence. Drive safe." And then Archie closed the door. The click of the lock engaging was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I stared at the wood grain of the door for a full minute. I could hear muffled laughter from inside. I could hear the clink of crystal glasses. They were already back to their party, their important people, completely unbothered by the fact that they had just discarded their daughter like refuse. I turned around and walked back to my car. I didn't cry. Not yet. I was in a state of shock, a numbness that protected me from the immediate agony. I got into the driver's seat, turned the ignition, and blasted the heat. My hands were shaking so violently I couldn't grip the steering wheel. I drove to the end of the driveway and pulled over onto the shoulder of the main road. That was when the dam broke. I sobbed until my throat was raw, hitting the steering wheel, screaming into the empty car. The image of that pie, the symbol of my love, my skill, my success, sitting next to a dog bowl seared itself into my brain. It wasn't about the pastry. It was about the placement, beside the dog bowl. That was where they ranked me in the hierarchy of this family, below the pet. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. I wiped my eyes, thinking maybe, just maybe, it was an apology. Maybe Martha had realized how cruel that was. It was a text from Caleb. "Bro, did you drop off food? Mom said you stopped by. If you left cash, let me know. I need to pay the valet." He didn't even know I was there to eat. He assumed I was a delivery service. I stared at the screen, the tears drying on my cheeks, replaced by a cold, hard sensation in the pit of my stomach. It was a feeling I hadn't let myself feel in years, pure, unadulterated clarity. I looked at the house in the rearview mirror, glowing with warmth and exclusion. They saw a desperate daughter. They saw a cook. They saw someone they could use, abuse, and discard because they assumed I would always come back for scraps. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They lived in a world of image and perception, a world built on favors and social standing. And in this city, The person who controlled the food, the service, and the venues for the elite was Archie, and it certainly was Caleb. It was me. They thought they were the kings of this town, but they had no idea they were already standing in my kingdom. To understand why that moment broke me, you have to understand what I sacrificed to try and fix us. I didn't become a chef because I loved food, though I do. I became a chef because it was the only time the house was quiet. Growing up, Archie and Martha were volatile. Their marriage was a battleground of passive-aggressive comments and status anxiety. But when a dinner party was perfect, when the roast was tender and the wine was flowing, they were happy. They were calm. I learned to cook to keep the peace. By 12, I was preparing 3C, or sem meals. By 16, I was managing the catering for Martha's charity luncheons because she was too stressed to handle the vendors. I gave up my weekends, my summers, and eventually my law degree to build something they might respect. When I started Savor, I did it with a small business loan I guaranteed against my own devastatingly high-interest credit cards. I never asked them for a dime. In fact, I was the one giving. There was the time Caleb, my younger brother, totaled his Porsche while under the influence. Archie didn't want the insurance rates to spike or the police report to leak. Who paid the towing company off the books? I did. Who drove Caleb to rehab every morning at 5:00 a.m. so he could be back in time to pretend he was consulting for Archie's firm? I did. Caleb was 27 now, a crypto entrepreneur, which was family code for unemployed gambler. He was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. He had Archie's jawline and Martha's ability to lie without blinking. He had never worked a real day in his life. He viewed me not as a sister, but as a resource, an ATM that also dispensed lasagna. Then there were the architects of my misery, Archie and Martha. Archie, at 65, was a retired investment banker who believed a person's worth was directly correlated to their job title. He had spent his life accumulating status symbols, the boat, the club membership, the purebred dog, and he viewed his children as extensions of that collection. Caleb was the heir apparent, the shiny object. I was the anomaly. To Archie, service was something you bought, not something you did. The fact that I served people for a living, even if I was making 3 times his retirement pension, was a stain on his reputation. He often introduced me to his friends as still figuring things out, even after I won the city's Entrepreneur of the Year award. Martha, 63, was the enforcer. She was the chair of the Historical Society, a woman whose smile never reached her eyes. She was a master of the backhanded compliment. She would praise my weight loss by asking if I was sick. She would compliment my business by asking if I was tired of smelling like onions. Her cruelty was subtle, designed to be deniable. But the dog bowl incident? That wasn't subtle. That was a declaration of war. As I drove away that Thanksgiving, the image of them played in my mind. Archie, with his perfectly coiffed silver hair and dead eyes, drinking scotch while his daughter stood in the cold. Martha, placing my heart on the floor for a dog to eat. They were polished, wealthy, and respected by everyone who didn't know them, but they were wrought disguised as marble. I knew, with a certainty that terrified me, that they would need me again. Caleb was dating a girl from the Kensington family, old money, the kind that made Archie look like a lottery winner. If that relationship progressed, there would be an engagement. There would be a party. And my parents, who were leveraged to the hilt to maintain their lifestyle, would need to put on a show they couldn't afford. They would come for me. They would smile and ask for a family favor. And for the first time in my life, I wouldn't be waiting with a pie. I would be waiting with a contract. The silence following Thanksgiving was not a void. It was a sanctuary. For 6 months, I didn't speak to Archie, Martha, or Caleb. I didn't block their numbers. That would have signaled that I cared enough to be bothered, but I simply stopped engaging. When Martha sent a text at Christmas asking if I was still sulking, I didn't reply. When Archie forwarded a LinkedIn article about the rise of blue-collar service jobs with a passive-aggressive thought-of-you note, I deleted it unread. In that silence, Savor exploded. We landed the contract for the mayor's gala and the exclusive catering rights for the city's new modern art museum. I was working 18-hour days, my feet aching, my hands constantly smelling of vanilla bean and truffle oil, but for the first time in my life, the exhaustion felt clean. I was building an empire on my own terms, brick by sugar-spun brick. Then came the notification. I was in my office, reviewing the supply chain logistics for the upcoming wedding season, when my phone buzzed with a news alert. It was a local society blog, Kensington heiress to wed local tech entrepreneur. I clicked the link, my stomach doing a slow, familiar roll. There was Caleb wearing a suit I knew my father had paid for, his arm draped possessively around Juliet Kensington. Juliet was the real deal, old money, philanthropic, and by all accounts, genuinely kind. Her family owned half the commercial real estate in the city. Caleb looked like the cat who had not only eaten the canary, but had convinced the canary it was an honor to be digested. The caption read, "A summer engagement party is planned at the groom's family estate." I set the phone down, the groom's family. Lie estate, my parents' house. I knew exactly what was happening inside that Georgian colonial. Panic. Archie and Martha were housepoor. I knew this because I had seen the overdue notices they thought they hid well during my childhood. Maintaining the appearance of wealth costs significantly more than actually being wealthy. A party for the Kensingtons wouldn't just be a dinner, it would be a coronation. It would cost 6 figures, easily. Money they didn't have. 2 days later, the call came. It wasn't Martha or Archie. It was their assistant, a frantic young woman named Sarah who sounded like she was on the verge of tears. "Florence, hi, it's Sarah from your father's. Well, from the house. Your mother asked me to call. She wanted to know if you were free on the 14th of July. I leaned back in my leather chair, twirling a pen. "Hello, Sarah. I'm afraid my calendar is managed by my office manager. You can send an inquiry through the website." "Please, Florence," Sarah lowered her voice to a whisper. "They are firing everyone. The original caterer, Piers, pulled out yesterday. Your mother is screaming about lawsuits, but I think the deposit check bounced. They need you. They said to tell you it's a family emergency." A bounce? Piers was the most expensive outfit in the city. If they bounced a check with Piers, they were in deep water. "Tell them I'll take a meeting," I said, my voice cool. "But Sarah, tell them I'm coming as a vendor, not a daughter." After I hung up, I didn't just prep a menu. I called in a favor. My best friend, Jessica, was a forensic accountant who specialized in high-asset divorces. We met for coffee an hour later. "I need you to look into my parents," I said, sliding a coffee across the table. "Public records, liens, whatever you can find. If I'm going to walk back into the lion's den, I need to know if the lions have teeth or if they're just gumming the furniture." Jessica typed away on her laptop for 20 minutes while I silently reviewed my platinum package pricing. When she finally looked up, her expression was grim. "Flo," she said softly, "it's a bloodbath." "How bad?" "They have 3 mortgages on the house. The boat is repossessed. They just haven't moved it from the marina yet because the paperwork is backed up. And Caleb, his startup has a massive judgment against it for fraud. He owes investors nearly 200 grand. I stared at the screen, the numbers painting a picture of desperate, clawing ruin. They aren't throwing this party to celebrate a marriage, I realized, the pieces clicking into place. They're throwing it to secure the bag. They need the Kensington connection to refinance their debt or get a bailout from the in-laws. "Exactly," Jessica confirmed. "If this wedding doesn't happen, your parents are bankrupt within the quarter." I nodded slowly. The anger I expected to feel wasn't there. Instead, I felt the cold, sharp edge of opportunity. They needed me. They didn't just need a caterer. They needed a co-conspirator to maintain their illusion. "Thank you, Jess," I said, standing up. "I have everything I need." I wasn't going to save them. I was going to let them sign their own death warrant. The driveway hadn't changed, but the atmosphere had. The lawn, usually manicured to within an inch of its life, looked slightly overgrown. The fountain in the center of the circular drive was dry. Small cracks in the facade of the perfect family were beginning to show, visible only to those who knew where to look. I parked my company van, a sleek matte black vehicle emblazoned with the gold Savor logo, right in front of the main entrance. I didn't go to the side door. I didn't knock. I walked in with my clipboard and my assistant, Leo, a 6'4" former linebacker who handled my logistics and occasionally my security. We found them in the sunroom. Martha was aggressively arranging hydrangeas while Archie paced the floor, barking into a cell phone. Caleb was sprawled on a chaise lounge, scrolling through Instagram, looking bored. When I walked in, the room went silent. "You're here," Martha said, not looking up from the flowers. "Good, we're behind schedule. Pierre was completely unprofessional. We need a menu that screams old-world elegance but with a modern twist. And obviously, we need the family rate." "Hello to you too, Mother," I said, sitting down at the glass table without being invited. Leo stood silently behind me, his arms crossed. Archie hung up his phone and turned to me. He looked older. The lines around his mouth were deeper, etched with stress. "Florence, glad you came to your senses. We need this handled. Juliet's parents are expecting the best. Don't embarrass us." "I have no intention of embarrassing anyone," I said, opening my portfolio. "But before we discuss menus, we need to discuss terms." "Terms?" Caleb scoffed, not looking up from his phone. "Just cook the food, Flo. We'll cover the costs. Tea of ingredients or whatever." I slid a document across the table. It was my standard contract, but with a few very specific addendums. "This is the contract for the Gilded Gala package," I explained calmly. "It includes a staff of 15, a 5-course tasting menu, open bar management, and setup breakdown. The total comes to $45,000. $45,000. Archie's face turned a violent shade of red. "Are you insane? You're my daughter. You should be doing this as a gift to your brother." "The gift," I said, my voice steady, "is that I'm willing to take the job at all on 2 weeks' notice. My rush fee is usually double." "We aren't signing that," Martha snapped, dropping a hydrangea stem. "We'll find someone else." "No, you won't," I said. I didn't shout. I didn't stand up. I just looked at them. "I know Pierre didn't pull out. I know his check bounced. I know you've been blacklisted by Gourmet Events and Lux Catering for non-payment. I know about the third mortgage, Archie, and I know about the judgment against Caleb's company." The silence that followed was suffocating. Caleb dropped his phone. Martha went pale, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. Archie looked like he had been slapped. "How dare you?" Archie whispered, but there was no power in it. It was the hiss of a deflating balloon. "I run a business," I continued, "and my business doesn't extend credit to high-risk clients. If you want me to cater this engagement party, which, let's be honest, is the only thing standing between you and total social excommunication, you will sign this contract." I tapped the paper. "Full payment is due 48 hours before the event. Certified bank check or wire transfer only. And Clause 14B, client conduct. If any member of the hosting party speaks to me or my staff with disrespect, insults, or aggression, I reserve the right to terminate service immediately and vacate the premises, retaining full payment." "You would walk out on your brother's engagement?" Martha asked, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and fear. "I would walk out on a client who violated my contract," I corrected. "So, do we have a deal? Or should I go home and let you serve Juliet's family pizza?" Archie stared at me. For the first time in 32 years, he wasn't looking at a disappointment. He was looking at a predator who had cornered him. He hated me in that moment, truly, deeply hated me, but he had no choice. He snatched the pen. "Fine, but if the steak is overcooked, I'm suing you." "The steak will be perfect, Dad," I said, taking the signed contract back. "Just make sure the check clears." The 2 weeks leading up to the gala were a masterclass in tension. I treated the house like a job site. I arrived, I directed my team, and I left. I didn't stay for coffee. I didn't ask about their lives. Every interaction was filtered through the lens of the contract. When Martha tried to critique the font on the menu cards, I directed her to the clause stating that design elements are at the sole discretion of the vendor. When Caleb tried to demand a specific, discontinued brand of tequila, I sent him an invoice for the sourcing fee. He dropped the request. But as I worked, I watched. I saw the desperation in their eyes. They were terrified. They were selling off furniture, pieces sent for restoration, Martha claimed, but I saw the auction house tags on the back of the buffet table before it was hauled away. The real revelation, however, came 3 days before the party. We were doing a final tasting. Juliet Kensington was there, along with her mother, Eleanor. Eleanor was a formidable woman, sharp-eyed and elegant, the kind of woman Martha pretended to be. Juliet was sweet, naive, and clearly head over heels for Caleb. She kept touching his arm, looking at him with adoring eyes. Caleb preened, playing the part of the successful tech mogul perfectly. "This risotto is divine," Eleanor said, nodding at me. "You must be very proud of your daughter, Martha. Savor is the talk of the town." Martha's smile was tight, like a wire pulled to its breaking point. "Yes, Florence has always been industrious. We're glad she could find the time for us." "Actually," Archie interjected, taking a heavy swig of wine, "we're doing her a favor, giving her a chance to work a real event. Her little business is fine for birthday parties, but this is the big leagues." My assistant, Leo, stiffened beside me. I placed a hand on his arm to stop him. "Well," Juliet chirped, trying to cut the tension, "I think it's wonderful. Caleb told me how you guys are financing the whole honeymoon as a surprise gift. It's so generous." I froze. "Excuse me," I asked, keeping my voice pleasant. "The honeymoon," Juliet beamed. "Caleb said you and your parents are paying for a month in the Maldives. That's why we're keeping the wedding budget small, right?" I looked at Caleb. He refused to meet my eyes. I ooked at Archie and Martha. They were staring at their plates, focused intently on the risotto. They hadn't just lied about their wealth. They were actively using my name and my alleged money to promise things they couldn't deliver. They were setting me up. When the check for the Maldives never came, who would look like the villain? The sister who promised and flaked. "That sounds extensive," was all I said. Later that afternoon, while my staff was packing up the tasting plates, I went into Archie's study to retrieve a signed work order. The desk was a mess of papers. I shouldn't have snooped, but I didn't have to. The document was right on top. It was a loan application, not a mortgage, a hard money loan. Predatory didn't even begin to cover it. 25% interest. Collateral, the house. The reason stated for the loan, bridge capital for joint venture with Kensington Estate Group. They were already leveraging the marriage before it even happened. They were using Juliet's family name to secure loans without the Kensingtons' knowledge. This wasn't just bankruptcy, this was fraud. If the Kensingtons found out, they wouldn't just cancel the wedding, they would destroy Archie. I took a photo of the document. As I walked out of the study, Archie was waiting in the hall. "The check," he grunted, shoving an envelope at me. "Full payment. Now get out of my sight until Saturday." I opened the envelope. It was a personal check. "Contract says certified funds or wire," I said, holding it up. "It's good," Archie snapped. "Just deposit it on Monday. The funds are moving around." "Monday is after the party," I said. "If this bounces on Monday, I've already fed your guests." "Are you calling me a liar?" Archie stepped closer, looming over me. "I am your father. You will take the check, you will serve the food, and you will keep your mouth shut about your terms. If you embarrass me in front of Eleanor Kensington, I will ruin you. I still have friends in this town, Florence. I can make sure no one hires Savor ever again." He was threatening to destroy the one thing I had built, the one thing that was mine, to protect his house of cards. "I'll see you Saturday, Dad," I said quietly, tucking the check into my pocket. I walked out to the van. I didn't deposit the check. I called Jessica. "Jess," I said, my voice shaking with adrenaline. "Verify a check for me. And then, I need you to find out if the Kensingtons have any idea their name is on a hard money loan application. On it, she said. Saturday was going to be interesting. I wasn't just bringing the food, I was bringing the receipt. Saturday arrived with a humidity that made the air feel heavy, clinging to the skin like a bad memory. The estate looked magnificent, I had to give them that. My team had transformed the overgrown garden into a twinkling wonderland of string lights and white linen. We had strategically placed potted palms to hide the peeling paint on the gazebo and angled the tables so the guests wouldn't see the empty patches of lawn where the landscaping service had stopped coming. To the untrained eye, it was the height of luxury. To me, it was a stage set for a tragedy. My staff moved with military precision. Leah was running the bar, charming the Kensingtons' wealthy friends, while I managed the pass in the portable kitchen tent we had set up near the patio. The first 2 courses, a chilled cucumber gazpacho followed by seared scallops, had gone out flawlessly. The guests were raving. I could see Martha from my vantage point, holding court at the head table, laughing a little too loudly, her hand gripping her wine glass like a lifeline. Then my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. It was the text from Jessica. Confirmed, the account the check was drawn on was closed 3 weeks ago. It's a ghost account. Also, I pulled the property records. There's a lien filing from yesterday. They are officially insolvent, Flo. And the loan application with Kensington's name, I called the bank to verify employment. They think Caleb is a VP at Kensington Enterprises. It's straight-up fraud. I stared at the screen. The check was a piece of paper worth less than the napkin I was holding. They had stolen $45,000 worth of my labor, food, and staff time. They had looked me in the eye, their own daughter, and robbed me to pay for a party to scam a new family. I felt a cold, calm wash over me. I walked out of the tent and signaled Leo. Hold the main course. Chef, Leo looked concerned. The steaks are resting. We're 2 minutes from service. Hold it, I repeated, and cut the music. The music. Cut it. I walked onto the patio. The band, a jazz quartet I had hired as a favor to an old friend, trailed off into silence at Leo's signal. The chatter of 60 guests grew loud for a moment, then hush fell as they realized something was wrong. Archie was standing near the sweetheart table, a glass of champagne in hand, mid-toast to Mr. Kenson. Gitan. He looked up, annoyed by the silence, and saw me standing in the center of the patio, not in my chef's whites, but having removed my apron to reveal the sharp black suit I wore underneath. Florence, Archie's voice was a warning growl. What is the meaning of this? Where is the steak? I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I pitched my voice to Carrie, the same way I did when addressing a banquet hall. There will be no steak, Archie, I said. A ripple of confused whispers went through the crowd. Martha stood up, her chair scraping violently against the stone. Florence, get back in the kitchen. You are embarrassing us. I'm afraid not, I said, stepping closer to the head table. I looked directly at Mr. and Mrs. Kensington. They looked baffled but attentive. Per Clause 14B of my contract, I am terminating service immediately due to non-payment and fraudulent conduct. You little, Caleb lunged up, his face purple. We paid you. Dad gave you a check. He did, I said, reaching into my pocket and pulling out the crumpled check. I held it up. He gave me a check from an account that was closed 3 weeks ago. He knowingly handed his daughter a bouncing check to trick me into serving this meal. She's lying, Martha shrieked, her poise shattering instantly. She's always been jealous of Caleb. She's trying to ruin his big day. Am I? I turned to Mr. Kensington. He was a tall, imposing man who had built an empire on due diligence. He wasn't looking at me with anger. He was looking at me with curiosity. Mr. Kensington, I apologize for ruining your dinner, but I couldn't let you sign the paperwork my father has waiting for you in his study without you knowing the truth. Archie dropped his glass. It shattered, the sound like a gunshot in the silent garden. Shut up, you shut your mouth. I ignored him. I pulled the printout of the loan application from my jacket pocket. My father and brother have applied for a $2 million hard money loan, I said, handing the paper to Mr. Kensington's security detail, who passed it to the man himself. They listed you as a co-guarantor. They also listed Caleb as a vice president of your firm. They are using this marriage not to build a family, but to bail out their bankruptcy. The house we are standing in is in foreclosure. The boat is gone. And if you let your daughter marry Caleb, her trust fund will be drained within a year to pay off his gambling debts. The silence now was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a bomb having gone off, with the dust just starting to settle. Mr. Kensington put on his reading glasses. He scanned the document. His face went from confusion to granite. He looked up at Archie. "Is this your signature, Robert?" Archie was trembling. He looked small suddenly. The bluster, the arrogance, the executive facade, it all evaporated, leaving behind a scared old man. It was a misunderstanding. It's Bridge Capital. Just until the market turns. We were going to tell you. You forged my signature as a guarantor, Mr. Kensington said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. It's not forgery, Caleb shouted, desperate. We're practically family. It was implied consent. Juliet, who had been sitting frozen, slowly stood up. She looked at Caleb, really looked at him, and then she looked at me. She saw the pain in my eyes. She saw that I hadn't done this to be cruel. I had done it because I was the only one brave enough to tell her the truth. Implied consent, Juliet whispered. She took the massive diamond ring off her finger. It was probably bought on credit, or maybe it was a fake. She dropped it into the half-eaten gazpacho bowl in front of her. Juliet, baby, wait, Caleb pleaded, reaching for her. Don't touch her, Mr. Kensington barked. He stood up, towering over the table. Eleanor, get the car, we are leaving. But the dinner, Martha whimpered, looking at the guests who were now awkwardly standing up, checking their phones, desperate to escape the blast radius. We have the steak. Florence, Mr. Kensington turned to me. He didn't look at my parents. He looked only at me. I assume you have not been paid. No, sir, I said. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a checkbook, and uncapped a fountain pen. He wrote a check, tore it out, and handed it to me. For your staff, he said, and for your honesty, I suspect this was the hardest thing you've ever had to do. It was, I said, my voice finally wavering. Thank you, he said. He took his daughter's arm. Juliet stopped as she passed me. She didn't say a word, but she squeezed my hand hard, her eyes filled with tears. As the Kensingtons walked out, the dam broke. The other guests began to flee, muttering excuses, leaving their wine glasses half full. I turned to my team. Pack it up, we're leaving. Archie and Martha stood amidst the wreckage of their social standing. Martha was sobbing into a napkin. Caleb was chugging a bottle of wine. Archie just stared at me, his eyes full of venom. You're dead to me, he hissed. You ungrateful, spiteful bitch, you're dead to me. I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, his anger didn't scare me. It didn't make me feel small. It made me feel nothing. I know, I said calmly. I was dead to you the moment I didn't fit your picture, but at least now I'm free. I turned my back on them and walked out of the garden, leaving them in the dark, with no food, no guests, and nowhere left to hide. The fallout was swift and total. In the society circles of our city, bankruptcy is a scandal, but fraud is a death sentence. The Kensingtons didn't just walk away, they pressed charges. Mr. Kensington was a man of principle, and he viewed the identity theft regarding the loan application as a personal insult. Caleb was arrested 3 days later. It was all over the local news. Socialite Cyan charged with bank fraud. He took a plea deal to avoid jail time, agreeing to 5 years of probation and restitution, but his reputation was incinerated. He was forced to move into a studio apartment in the bad part of town, working stocking shelves at a warehouse because it was the only job he could get with a fraud conviction. Archie and Martha fared no better. The foreclosure on the house moved with lightning speed once the creditors realized there was no Kensington bailout coming. They were evicted in late August. I heard through the grapevine that they moved to a small, two-bedroom rental in a neighboring state, trying to outrun their shame. They sent me letters, long, rambling diatribes blaming me for their ruin, but I never opened them. I put them directly into the shredder. I thought I would feel guilty. I waited for the sleepless nights, the regret, but they never came. Instead, I felt lighter. The energy I had spent for decades trying to please them, trying to earn a love that was never for sale, was finally mine to keep. 3 months after the disastrous gala, I was in the kitchen of Savor, testing a new rosemary focaccia recipe. The bell above the front door chimed. I wiped my flour-dusted hands on my apron and walked out to the front counter. It was Juliet. She looked different. She wasn't wearing the heavy makeup or the stiff designer clothes she had worn during her engagement. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater. She looked younger, softer, and sadder. "Hi, Florence," she said, her voice quiet. "Juliet," I said, surprising myself by coming around the counter. I didn't think I'd see you again." "I wanted to come sooner," she admitted, "but it took me a while to process everything." She looked around the bakery, taking in the smell of yeast and sugar, the warmth of the space. "I wanted to thank you," she said, meeting my eyes. "My father, he was furious at first, not at you but at the situation. But he told me last night that you saved my life. Not just my money, but my life. If I had married him—" She trailed off, a shudder running through her. I didn't see it. I didn't see who they really were. I thought they loved me. "They don't know how to love people, Juliet," I said gently. "They only know how to own things, and they thought they owned you." Juliet nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "You lost your family to save me. I know that cost you everything." "No," I smiled, and I realized it was the truest thing I had ever said. "I didn't lose them. I just finally stopped looking for them where they never existed. I gained myself back." Juliet reached out and hugged me. It wasn't a polite, socialite hug. It was a real embrace, full of shared pain and healing. "My dad wants to hire Savor for the company holiday party," she mumbled into my shoulder. "He says you're the only honest vendor in the city." I laughed, a genuine, bubbling sound. "I'd be honored, but I'm charging him full price." "He wouldn't expect anything less," she laughed through her tears. I walked her to the door. As she left, the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the street. I turned the sign on the door to closed, but for me, everything was just opening up. I had walked into that house with a pie and a desperate need for approval. I had walked out with a contract and my dignity. My parents had told me to leave quietly. I hadn't. I had made a lot of noise. And in the silence that followed, I finally found my peace.